World History, a Cengage Advantage learning publication. Editors William J. Duker and Jackson J. Spielvogel. 2013. Preface. For several million years after primates first appeared on the surface of the earth, human beings lived in small communities, seeking to survive by hunting, fishing, and foraging in a frequently hostile environment. Then suddenly, in the space of a few thousand years, there was an abrupt change of direction as humans in a few widely scattered areas of the globe began to master the art of cultivating food crops. As food production increased, the population in those areas rose correspondingly, and people began to congregate in larger communities. Governments were formed to provide protection and other needed services to the local population. Cities appeared and became the focal point of cultural and religious development. Historians refer to this process as the beginnings of civilization. For generations, historians in Europe and the United States pointed to the rise of such civilizations as marking the origins of the modern world. Courses on Western civilizations, as conventionally has been thought, began with a chapter or two on the emergence of advanced societies in Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then proceeded to ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. From Greece and Rome, the road led directly to the rise of modern civilization in the West. There is nothing inherently wrong with this approach. Important aspects of our world today can indeed be traced back to these early civilizations, and all human beings the world over owe a considerable debt to their achievements. But all too often, this interpretation has been used to imply that the course of civilization has been linear, leading directly from the emergence of agricultural societies in ancient Mesopotamia to the rise of advanced industrial societies in Europe and North America. Until recently, however, most courses on world history taught in the United States routinely focused almost exclusively on the rise of the West, with only a passing glance at other parts of the world such as Africa, India, and East Asia. The contributions made by those societies to the culture and technology of our own time were often passed over in complete silence. Two major reasons have been advanced to justify this approach. For some, view that and argue that it is more important that young minds understand the roots of their own heritage than of peoples elsewhere in the world. In many cases, however, the motivation for this Eurocentric approach has been the belief that since the time of, for example, the pre-Socratics, and at least Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Western civilization has been the main driving force in the evolution of human society. Such an interpretation, however, represents a serious distortion of the process. During most of the course of human history, the most advanced civilizations have been in East Asia or the Middle East, not in the West. A relatively brief period of European dominance culminated with the era of imperialism in the 19th century, when the political, military, and economic power of the advanced nations of the West spanned the globe. During recent generations, however, that dominance has gradually eroded, partly as a result of changes taking place in Western societies, and partly because new centers of development are emerging elsewhere on the globe, notably in Asia, with the growing economic strength of China and India and many of their neighbors. World history, then, has been a complex process in which many branches of the human community have played an active part. The dominance of any one of them, any area of the world, has been a temporary rather than a permanent phenomenon. It will be our purpose, therefore, in this book to present a balanced picture of this story with all respect for the richness and diversity of the tapestry of the human experience. Due attention must be paid to the rise of the West, of course, since that has been the most dominant aspect of world history in recent centuries. But the contributions made by other peoples must be given adequate consideration, not only in the period prior to 1500, when the major centers of civilization were located in Asia, but also in our own day, where a multipolar picture of development is clearly beginning to emerge. To see a new revisionary history, refer to my playlist on the Silk Roads. Anyone who wishes to teach or write about world history must decide whether to present the topic as an integrated whole or as a collection of different cultures. The world that we live in today, of course, is in many respects an interdependent realm in terms of economics as well as culture and communications, a reality that is often expressed by the phrase global village. The convergence of peoples across the surface of the earth into an integrated world system began in early times and intensified after the rise of capitalism in the early modern era. In recognition of this trend, historians trained in global history, as well as instructors in a growing number of world history courses, have now begun to speak and write of a global approach that gives less attention to the study of individual civilizations and focuses instead on the big picture, or as the world historian Ferdinand Braudel termed it, interpreting world history as a river with no banks. On the whole, this development is to be welcomed as a means of bringing the common elements of the evolution of human society to our attention. But this approach also involves two problems. For the vast majority of the time on Earth, human beings have lived in partial or virtually total isolation from each other. Differences in climate, location, and geographical features have created human societies very different from each other in culture and historical experience. It has been only in relatively recent times. The commonly accepted date has long been the beginning of the age of European exploration at the end of the 15th century, but some would now push it back to the era of the Mongol Empire, or even earlier. Have cultural interchanges begun to create a common world system in which events taking place in one part of the world are rapidly transmitted throughout the entire globe, often with momentous consequences as a result? In recent generations, of course, the process of global interdependence has been proceeding even more rapidly. Nevertheless, even now, the process is by no means complete, as ethnic and regional differences continue to exist and to shape the course of world history. The tenacity of these differences and sensitivities is reflected not only in the rise of internecine conflicts in such divergent areas as Africa, India, and Eastern Europe, but also in the emergence in recent years of such regional organizations as the African Union, the Association for the Southeast Asian Nations, and the European Union, which was just added here recently, North Macedon. The second problem is a practical one. College students today often are not well informed about the distinctive character of civilizations such as China and India, and without sufficient exposure to the historical evolution of such societies, will assume all too readily that the peoples in these countries have had historical experiences similar to ours, and will therefore respond to various stimuli in a similar fashion to those living in Western Europe or the United States. If it is a mistake to ignore those forces that link us together, it is equally a mistake to underestimate those factors that continue to divide us and to differentiate us into a world of diverse peoples. Our response to this challenge has been to adopt a global approach to world history, while at the same time attempting to do justice to the distinctive character and development of individual civilizations and regions of the world. The presentation of individual cultures is especially important in parts 1 and 2, which cover a time when it is generally agreed that the process of global integration was not yet far advanced. Later chapters adopt a more comparative and thematic approach in the deference to the greater number of connections that have been established among the world's peoples since the 15th and 16th centuries, respectively. Part 5 consists of a series of chapters that center on individual regions of the world, while at the same time focusing on common problems related to the Cold War, the rise of global problems such as overproduction and environmental pollution. We have sought balance in other ways as well. Many textbooks tend to simplify the content of history courses by emphasizing an intellectual or political perspective, or most recently, a social perspective, often at the expense of sufficient details and a chronological framework. This approach is confusing to students whose high school social studies programs have often neglected a systematic study of world history. We have attempted to write a well-balanced work in which political, economic, social, religious, intellectual, cultural, and military history are integrated into a chronologically ordered synthesis. A brief note to students about language and the dating of time. One of the most difficult challenges in studying world history is coming to grips with the multitude of names, words, and phrases in unfamiliar languages. Unfortunately, this problem has no easy solution, and so therefore we have tried to alleviate the difficulty, where possible, by providing an English language translation of foreign words or phrases, a glossary have you, and a pronunciation guide. The issue is especially complicated in the case of Chinese, because two separate systems are commonly used to transliterate the spoken Chinese language into the Roman alphabet. The Wade-Giles system, invented in the 19th century, was more frequently used into recent years when the Pinyin system was adopted by the People's Republic of China as its own official form of transliteration. We have therefore opted to use the latter, as it appears to be gaining acceptance in the United States, but the initial use of a Chinese word is accompanied by its Wade-Giles equivalent in a parentheses for the benefit of those who may encounter the term in their outside readings. In our examination of world history, we also need to be aware of the dating of time. In recording the past, historians try to determine the exact time when events occurred. World War II in Europe, for example, began on September the 1st, 1939, when Adolf Hitler sent German troops into Poland, and ended on May the 7th, 1945, when Germany surrendered. By using dates, historians can place events in order and try to determine the development of patterns over periods of time. If someone asked you when you were born, you would reply with a number, such as 1993. In the United States, we would all accept that number without question, because it is part of the dating system followed in the Western world, for example, Europe and the Western Hemisphere. In this system, events are dated by counting backward or forward from the birth of Jesus Christ, assumed to be the year 1. An event that took place 400 years before the birth of Christ would commonly be dated 400 BC, or before Christ. Dates after the birth of Christ are labeled as AD, as you should now know in the Latin alphabet words Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord, the year since the birth of Jesus Christ. Thus, an event that took place 250 years after the birth of Jesus Christ is written AD 250. It can also be written as 250, or just as you would not give your birth year as AD 1993, but simply as 1993. Many historians now prefer to use the abbreviations BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, Common Era, instead of BC and AD. This is especially true of world historians who prefer to use symbols that are not so Western or Christian oriented. The dates, of course, remain the same, thus 1950 BCE and 1950 BC refer to the same year, as do AD 40 and 40 CE. In keeping up with the current usage by many world historians, this book uses the terms BCE and CE. Historians also make use of other terms to refer to time. A decade is 10 years, a century is 100 years, and a millennium is 1,000 years. The phrase 4th century BCE refers to the fourth period of 100 years, counting backward from 1. The assumed date of the birth of Jesus Christ, since the 1st century BCE would be the years 100 BCE to 1 BCE, the 4th century BCE would be the years 400 BCE to 301 BCE. We could say then that an event in 350 BCE took place in the 4th century BCE. Now, the phrase 4th century CE refers to the fourth period of 100 years after the birth of Christ. Since the first period of 100 years would be the years 1 to 100, the fourth period of 4th century would be the years 301 to 400. We would then say, for example, that an event in 350 took place in the 4th century. Likewise, the first millennium BCE refers to the years 1000 BCE to 1 BCE, and the second millennium CE refers to the years 1001 to 2000. The dating of events can also vary from people to people. Most people in the Western world use the Western calendar, also known as the Gregorian calendar, after Pope Gregory the 13th, who refined it in the year 1582. The Hebrew calendar uses a different system in which the year 1 is the equivalent of the Western year 3760 BCE, once calculated to be the date of the creation of the world, according to the Old Testament. Thus, the Western year 2012 corresponds to the year 5772 on the Jewish calendar. The Islamic calendar begins year 1 on the day Muhammad fled from Mecca, which is the year 622 on the Western calendar. Themes for understanding world history. As they pursue their craft, historians often recognize their material on the basis of themes that enable them to ask and try to answer basic questions about the past. Such is our intention here. In preparing the 7th edition of this book, we have selected several major themes that we believe are especially important in understanding the course of world history. These themes transcend the boundaries of time and space and have relevance to all cultures since the beginning of the human experience. In the chapters that follow, we will refer to these themes frequently as we advance from the prehistoric era to the present, given that humans have existed for about 7 million years. Where appropriate, we shall make comparisons across cultural boundaries or across different time periods. To facilitate this process, we have included a comparative essay in each chapter that focuses on a particular theme within the specific time period discussed in that section of the book. For example, the comparative essays in chapter 1 and 6 deal with the human impact on the natural environment during the pre-modern era, while those in chapters 22 and 30 discuss the issues during the age of imperialism and in the contemporary world. Each comparative essay is identified with a particular theme, although it should be noted that many essays deal with several themes at the same time. We have sought to illustrate these themes through the use of comparative illustrations in each chapter. These illustrations are comparative in nature and seek to encourage the reader to think about thematic issues in cross-cultural terms, while not losing sight of the unique characteristics of individual societies. Our 7 themes, each divided into 2 subtopics, are listed as follows. 1. Politics and government. The study of politics seeks to answer certain basic questions that historians have about the structure of a society. How were people governed? What was the relationship between the ruler and the ruled? What people or groups of people, the political elites for example, held political power? What actions did people take to guarantee their security or change their form of government? 2. Arts and ideas. We cannot understand a society without looking at its culture, or the common ideas, beliefs, and patterns of behavior that are passed on from one generation to the next. Culture includes both high culture and popular culture. High culture consists of the writings of a society's thinkers and the works of its artists. A society's popular culture is the world of ideas and experiences of ordinary people. Today, the media have embraced the term popular culture to describe the current trends and fashionable styles. 3. Religion and philosophy. Throughout history, people have sought to find a deeper meaning in human life, something that is above a subjective meaning. But how have the world's great religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, for example, influenced people's lives? How have they spread to create new patterns of culture in other parts of the world? 4. Family and society. The most basic social unit in human society has always been the family. From a study of family and social patterns, we learn about the different social classes that make up a society and the relationship with one another. We also learn about the role of gender in individual societies. What different roles did men and women play in their societies? How and why were those societies and roles different? 5. Science and technology. For thousands of years, people around the entire globe have made scientific discoveries and technological innovations that have changed our world, from the creation of stone tools that made farming easier to advanced computers that guide our airplanes. Science and technology have altered how humans have related to their world. 6. Earth and the environment. Throughout history, peoples and societies have been affected by the physical world in which they live. Climatic changes alone have been an important factor in human history. Through their economic activities, people and societies in turn have also made an impact on their world. Human activities have affected the physical environment and even endangered the very existence of entire societies and species. 7. Interaction and exchange. Many world historians believe that the exchange of ideas and innovations is the driving force behind the evolution of human societies. Knowledge of agriculture, writing, and printing, metalworking, and the navigational techniques as well, for example, spread gradually from one part of the world to other regions and eventually changed the face of the entire planet. The process of cultural and technological exchange took place in various ways, including trade, conquest, and the migration of peoples.